The old man hit the floor, not from a punch, not from a shove, but from the sheer force of humiliation. His worn-out bucket clattering against the polished tiles of the most successful electronics store in town, the sound cutting through the hum of air conditioning and soft background music like a blade. Every customer froze. Every employee looked away, and the young owner stood there with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes cold, pointing at the door as though he were disposing of something unclean. The old janitor didn't argue. He didn't plead. He slowly bent down, picked up his bucket with hands that had seen decades of honest work, and walked toward the exit with a quiet dignity that made the whole scene even more painful to witness. And just before the glass door swung shut behind him, he paused. He turned around one last time. He looked directly at the young man who had just humiliated him in front of an entire store of people. And in a voice so calm it was almost frightening, he said, "One day, young man, you'll wish you had asked my name." The owner laughed. 3 days later, a black luxury car pulled up outside the store. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like this one don't come around every day. Now, to understand why that moment in the doorway mattered so much, you have to go back to where Ethan Brooks began. Because no one becomes the kind of man who throws an elderly janitor out of his store without a story behind it. And Ethan's story, like so many cautionary tales, started with something genuinely beautiful before it curdled into something else entirely. Ethan Brooks was 34 years old, and by every visible measure, he had made it. He had started at 22 with nothing more than a folding table, a second-hand laptop, and a kiosk space he rented for $300 a month in the corner of a local market. He sold phone accessories, cables, chargers, screen protectors, things people needed but never thought about until the moment they desperately did. He worked 14-hour days. He learned to read customers the way a fisherman reads weather, knowing when to push, when to wait, when to simply smile and let the product speak for itself. Within 2 years, he had saved enough to open a proper storefront. Within 5, he had 3 locations. By 30, he had the largest privately owned electronics retail business in the entire region. 60 employees, a warehouse, supplier relationships with international brands. His photograph had appeared in the local business magazine twice. His mother kept both copies in a frame above her fireplace. The town admired him. There was no question about that. But admiration, Ethan had slowly discovered, was a dangerous thing to receive too early. It had a way of convincing a man that his success was entirely his own making, that the customers who chose him, the employees who served him, the suppliers who trusted him, were all simply beneficiaries of his brilliance rather than the very foundation on which his brilliance stood. He had begun to talk differently, to walk differently, to look at people differently. His store manager, Sarah, had noticed it first. She had worked with Ethan since the early days, back when he used to bring homemade lunch for the whole team on Fridays and remember every employee's birthday without being reminded. She remembered the Ethan who once chased down a customer who had left his wallet behind, running 3 blocks in the rain to return it. That Ethan had existed. She was certain of it. But the Ethan who now walked the floor of his flagship store was harder, quicker to criticize, slower to think. He had a habit of looking through people rather than at them, as though everyone in his vicinity were either an asset or an obstacle, and his eyes were simply sorting them. His delivery supervisor, Marcus, had a nickname for it among the warehouse crew. They called it the scan. Ethan would walk in, scan the room, identify whatever wasn't performing to his standard, address it with the economy of a man who considered human conversation a minor inconvenience, and walk back out. No greetings. No small talk. Just the scan. Ethan's mother, Grace, worried about him in the way only mothers can, quietly, consistently, and with a love that refused to dress itself up as anything other than the truth. "You've forgotten something," she told him once over Sunday dinner, watching him tap responses into his phone while his food went cold. "What's that?" he said, not looking up. "That you were somebody's nobody once too." He had smiled at that. The polite, slightly impatient smile of a son who loves his mother but has long since decided she belongs to a different era. And then his phone buzzed again, and the conversation was over. She had one other thing she used to say to him. a phrase she'd repeated so many times over the years that it had become almost invisible to him through sheer repetition. Never judge someone by where they stand today. You don't know where they've been. Ethan had heard those words so many times that he had stopped hearing them at all. He was about to learn what they meant. Now, the old man. Nobody in town knew his full name. Most people simply called him the old fellow with the cart, or sometimes just that kind man. He had been a fixture in the neighborhood for years, a quiet, unhurried presence who seemed to exist slightly outside the normal pace of things, as though he were moving through the world on a frequency that most people had stopped being able to tune into. He swept the sidewalks outside the community center without being asked. He repaired the broken bench in the park 3 times, twice after vandals knocked it apart again overnight, and once after a winter storm reduced it to splinters. He fixed things. He cleaned things. He remembered people's names, not just first names, but full names, and often the names of their children and grandchildren too, which made strangers feel, in his presence, unexpectedly seen. He lived in a small apartment above a laundromat on the east side of town. No car. No television, as far as anyone could tell. He was occasionally spotted reading at the library, always in the same corner chair, always with a cup of tea from the vending machine beside him, always with an expression of someone who had found exactly the piece they were looking for. People had tried to give him money over the years. He always declined with the same gentle shake of the head and the same quiet phrase, "Keep it for someone who needs it more than I do." A woman named Dorothy, who ran the flower stall near the community garden, had once pushed a $50 bill into his pocket while he was helping her carry heavy pots. She discovered the next week that he had used it to buy school supplies for a boy in the neighborhood whose mother couldn't afford them. The boy was 7 years old. The old man had never mentioned it to anyone. Dorothy only found out because the boy's mother came to the flower stall specifically to ask if Dorothy knew who had left the supplies at their door. He had, by all accounts, one of the richest inner lives and one of the most modest outer lives of anyone in the community. And yet something about him, something in the way he carried himself, something in the steadiness of his gaze, something in the careful precision with which he chose his words, occasionally made people stop and wonder. There were moments, fleeting and strange, when you would catch him looking at something, a building, a street corner, a face in a crowd, with an expression that was difficult to name. Not nostalgia exactly, something more deliberate than that, like a man who understood the distance between where things were and where they could be, and was quietly, patiently working on the gap. Most people didn't think too hard about it. Most people, after all, were busy. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the old janitor walked into Ethan's store. The sky outside was the heavy gray of a storm that couldn't quite commit, and the streets were half empty. Inside the store, the lighting was warm and precise, the kind of lighting that made every product on the shelves look like it belonged in a magazine. A dozen or so customers moved between the displays. Soft, unobtrusive music played overhead. The place smelled of new electronics and expensive cologne, a smell Ethan had carefully curated, because he understood that people buy with their senses before they buy with their wallets. The old man entered slowly, pushing his cleaning cart through the front door, his shoes squeaking faintly on the wet mat just inside the entrance. He paused for a moment, scanning the room. Not the way Ethan scanned rooms, looking for problems, but more gently than that. Like someone searching for a familiar face. Several customers looked up. A few looked away quickly, the way people do when they're unsure how to respond to something unexpected in an environment where everything else is carefully controlled. The old man began to make his way toward the service counter. He never got there. Ethan had been at the back of the store, speaking to a supplier on the phone, when he noticed the old man through the glass partition of his corner office. He ended the call mid-sentence. His face changed. That particular expression settled into place, the one Sarah had learned to dread, and he crossed the store floor in 12 quick strides. "Excuse me." His voice was not loud, but it cut. The old man turned. "This is a retail store," Ethan said. "Not a community center. Not a shelter. I don't know what you're looking for, but you're making my customers uncomfortable." The old man looked at him for a moment. Just looked. There was nothing confrontational in his gaze. If anything, there was a kind of careful attention, like someone taking a measurement. "I'm looking for a young man who works here," he said. "I was told he might be able to help me with something." "Everyone here is busy," Ethan said. "Whatever you need. I'm sure there's somewhere more appropriate. It'll only take a moment. I said no. Ethan's voice dropped in a way that was worse than shouting. Quieter, harder, final. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The store had gone very still. Sarah, standing behind the main counter, felt her stomach drop. She had seen Ethan be brusque before. She had seen him be impatient, dismissive, even cutting. But there was something about this particular moment. The old man's age, his obvious lack of threat, the cleaning cart, the worn jacket, that made what was happening feel like something different. Something that couldn't be taken back. Young man, the old man said gently. I think perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. Ethan gestured toward the door. Please leave. A long pause. The old man nodded. Once, slowly, as though accepting something he had perhaps expected. He reached down and took hold of his cart. And as he turned toward the exit, he said, quietly enough that only those closest to him heard it clearly, respect costs nothing, son. Ethan didn't respond. Two of his employees moved to hold the door. The old man walked out without looking back. The glass door swung shut. The soft music continued overhead as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. Sarah was staring at the door. She couldn't explain it. Not then, not for days afterward. But there had been something in the old man's expression as he left. Not hurt, not anger. Something that was, somehow, much harder to dismiss. He had looked disappointed. Not in Ethan. In the situation. As though something that might have been beautiful had just, quietly and irrevocably, failed to occur. If you're still watching up to now, type I'm still here in the comment section. Because the story is about to shift in ways that will stay with you long after this video ends. It started slowly, the way real trouble usually does. 3 days after the incident, Ethan received a phone call from Hargreaves Technology Solutions, a corporate client that had been with him for 4 years, responsible for nearly 18% of his annual revenue. The account manager's voice was professional and carefully impersonal as he explained that Hargreaves had decided to move their electronics procurement contract to a different supplier. He thanked Ethan for his partnership. He wished him well. He declined, politely but firmly, to elaborate on the reason. Ethan spent an hour trying to reach the Hargreaves CEO. He was told the CEO was unavailable. The following Monday, a shipment of 60 premium laptops, already promised to 3 business clients, arrived from his main supplier with a customs documentation error that held them in a warehouse for 11 days. 11 days, during which time 2 of those clients canceled their orders and sourced the units elsewhere. The reviews came next. Not a flood, a trickle. Carefully worded, specific, credible. The kind that don't look coordinated but somehow arrive in clusters. Several mentioned the store's atmosphere. One used the phrase cold and unwelcoming. Another said simply, the owner treats some customers better than others. Marcus pulled Ethan aside on a Wednesday morning with a look on his face that Marcus almost never wore. Uncertain, almost reluctant. 3 people gave notice this week, he said. Sarah's thinking about it too. I'm not saying I know why exactly. But people are talking. Ethan said. Yeah, said Marcus. But usually not like this. Ethan dismissed it. He told himself it was coincidence, a rough patch, the kind every business hits eventually. He worked longer hours. He drove harder on costs. He made the kind of decisions under pressure that look like strength from the outside and feel like desperation from the inside. And then the investor arrived. His name was Richard Osei, and he was not a man who arrived anywhere without intention. He was 62 years old, impeccably dressed, with the kind of unhurried confidence that belongs exclusively to people who have not needed to impress anyone for a very long time. He walked into the store on a Thursday afternoon, asked for Ethan by name, and was shown to the back office without a word to anyone else. Ethan recognized the name immediately. Richard Osei was, by any measure, one of the most successful private investors in the country. He had been involved in the early funding of 4 companies that had gone on to become household names. His involvement in a business was not just capital, it was signal. It was credibility. It was the kind of endorsement that rewrote a company's trajectory. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He straightened his jacket. He offered his hand with exactly the right balance of confidence and deference. Richard Osei shook it briefly and sat down. Mr. Brooks, he said, I'll be direct, because I find directness saves everyone time. I'm not here about your business. Ethan blinked. I'm here, Richard said, because I'm trying to locate someone. An old man. He works in this neighborhood, cleans, fixes things, helps people. He was in your store approximately 2 weeks ago. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Ethan leaned back slowly. The janitor? His name is Samuel Carter, Richard said, watching Ethan's face with a precision that was almost clinical. And I need to find him. Why? Ethan said. And then, because something in him already knew the answer wasn't going to be comfortable. Who is he? Richard Osei looked at him for a long moment. That, he said quietly, is exactly the right question. And I think you should sit with the fact that you didn't ask it 2 weeks ago, when you had the chance. He stood, left a business card on the desk, and walked out. Ethan sat alone in his office for a very long time. He started asking around that same evening. The flower stall woman, Dorothy, told him about the school supplies. The library volunteer told him the old man had quietly donated an entire wing's worth of books 3 years ago, anonymously, paid for in cash, with a note that said only for the children who don't know yet that they love reading. The owner of the hardware store said the old man had once talked him through a business decision during what had nearly been a catastrophic moment, and that his advice had been, in retrospect, the sharpest and most strategically precise he had ever received from anyone, including the consultants he had paid thousands for. None of it made sense. A janitor, living above a laundromat, no car, no television, a cleaning cart, and a worn jacket. And yet, paid for surgeries, funded scholarships, saved businesses, left no fingerprints on any of it, because he had never wanted credit. Ethan drove to the public library on a Saturday morning and spent 3 hours in the archives section. He found it in a newspaper from 23 years ago. A photograph, slightly faded but unmistakable. A man standing on a stage before a gathering of business leaders. Younger, but the same careful eyes, the same quiet composure in the shoulders. The headline read, Carter Technology Partners closes $2.4 billion acquisition. Samuel Carter hailed as the decade's most transformative entrepreneur. Ethan's hands were not entirely steady as he read the article. Samuel Carter had built a technology infrastructure company from scratch in the early 90s, when the internet was still something only specialists talked about. He had seen what was coming when almost no one else had. He had built systems that became load-bearing walls in the architecture of the modern digital economy. His company had been acquired, not sold under pressure, but sold at the absolute peak, on his own terms, for a sum that had made international news. And then, 3 years later, his wife Elena had died in a car accident. His son Daniel, 26 years old, just beginning his own career, had been in the car with her. He had not survived either. The next article was dated 18 months after that. Samuel Carter had dissolved his remaining assets. He had set up 3 charitable foundations, funded them substantially, assigned independent trustees to run them, and walked away. He had given interviews to no one. He had attended no industry events. He had, as far as the public record was concerned, simply ceased to exist. Ethan sat in the library for a long time after that. He thought about the old man walking through his store with a cleaning cart. He thought about the squeaking shoes, the worn jacket, the patient voice. Respect costs nothing, son. He thought about what it must have cost to say that, not emotionally, because the old man had shown no distress, but philosophically. The kind of man who had built and given away more wealth than most people could imagine, who had chosen a life of quiet service after a grief that could have destroyed him, who had never once asked for recognition or return, walking into a store and being told to leave as though he were dirt on the floor. He drove to Richard Osei's office first thing Monday morning. Richard had been waiting for him, which told Ethan everything about how much Richard already understood about how this would unfold. Tell me everything, Ethan said. Richard poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down. Samuel has been doing this for years, he said, moving through communities, quietly observing, looking for someone specific, a young entrepreneur with enough drive to have built something real and enough humility left to know why they built it. Someone who hadn't yet forgotten that success is a responsibility as much as it is a reward. He was looking for a mentee, Ethan said. More than that, Richard said. He was looking for a legacy. Someone to carry forward everything he'd learned. Not the business knowledge, though that was extraordinary. The other thing. The thing that's harder to teach. The understanding that every person you encounter deserves to be treated as though their life is as full and as worthy as your own. He paused. You were on his list, Ethan. The past tense landed like a stone. Were, Ethan said. Were, Richard confirmed. He came to your store that day because he'd been watching you. He'd heard about where you started. He'd read about your business. He thought, he hoped, that you were someone who had held on to the right things while building the right things. He went in person because Samuel Carter never makes judgments about people secondhand. He always looks for himself. Ethan stared at the coffee in his hands. And then I threw him out, he said. And then you threw him out, Richard said. Not unkindly. Just honestly. Can I fix it? Richard looked at him for a long moment. I don't know, he said. But I know where he is. He was in the park. Not sitting on the bench he had repaired 3 times. He was crouched beside the playground equipment. One of the metal climbing frames had a loose bolt at the base, and he was working at it with a small wrench, with the focused patience of someone who genuinely found the task satisfying. 3 children played nearby, occasionally watching him with the frank, evaluative curiosity that only children allow themselves. Ethan stood at the edge of the park for a moment before he walked over. He had rehearsed this. He had written things down and crossed them out. He had thought about what a person says when they have done something that cannot be undone and must be acknowledged anyway. But standing here, watching this old man quietly fix a bolt in a park on a gray afternoon, everything rehearsed felt suddenly inadequate. He walked over. Mr. Carter. Samuel looked up. He didn't seem surprised. He set down the wrench and straightened slowly, with the careful movements of someone whose body has logged a great many years of physical labor. Mr. Brooks, he said. I owe you an apology, Ethan said. A real one. Not the kind where I explain what I was thinking or give context or ask you to understand where I was coming from. Just, I was wrong. I was unkind. And I am sorry. Samuel looked at him for a long time. The children kept playing. A bird moved somewhere in the branches overhead. The gray afternoon held its breath. Sit down, Samuel said. They sat on the repaired bench. You didn't fail because you insulted me, Samuel said. His voice was the same, quiet, unhurried, carrying the particular weight of someone who has thought carefully about every word before they speak it. I've been insulted by people far more deliberately than that. It didn't matter. Then what? You failed, Samuel said, because you stopped seeing people. He let that settle before he continued. The problem wasn't that you looked at me and saw a janitor. The problem was that you looked at me and saw a category, a type, something to be sorted and removed. You weren't responding to me, to a person, with a history, with something to say. You were responding to an image, a reflection of your own assumptions. Ethan didn't say anything. Success does that to people, Samuel said. Not all of them, but many. It creates a kind of efficiency of judgment. You learn to read situations quickly because the cost of being wrong is high, and so you start to rely on shortcuts, surfaces, and the shortcuts feel like wisdom because they usually work. Until they don't. Until they don't, Ethan repeated quietly. I had it too, Samuel said. 30 years ago. Not as visibly as you, perhaps, but I had it. I walked through rooms full of people, and I was present only to the ones who could move something forward for me. I look back on that now, and I feel the weight of it. All the people I looked through, all the conversations I didn't have, all the things I didn't know about the world because I only ever talked to people who confirmed what I already believed. He was quiet for a moment. Elena changed that, he said. My wife. She had this extraordinary gift for attending to people. Every person she encountered, she would give her full attention to. Not performance, not politeness, genuine interest. She believed, truly believed, that every person she met was carrying something worth knowing. He paused. I learned more from watching her do that over 27 years than I learned from every business book, every mentor, every boardroom conversation I ever had. Ethan felt something shift behind his ribs, something tight and resistant that had been there for a long time. I lost her, Samuel said simply. And Daniel. And for a long time after that I didn't. I wasn't capable of much. But eventually, gradually, I started doing what she would have done. Just showing up. Just paying attention. Just being useful in whatever small way was available. He looked across the park at the children playing. It turns out that's not a small thing at all. Ethan's eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. Why are you telling me this? He said. After what I did. Because you came, Samuel said. Because you found out the truth, and you came here anyway, knowing I didn't know you anything, knowing I might send you away. He glanced at Ethan. That took something. Whatever you may have lost along the way, that part of you is still there. He picked up the wrench again. Don't waste it, he said. The months that followed were not a transformation in the dramatic, sudden sense. Real change never is. It was incremental and sometimes uncomfortable. The work of a man dismantling habits that had taken years to build and replacing them with something more demanding, not less. Ethan started with the people closest to him. He called Sarah into his office on a Monday morning, not to review numbers, but to ask her how she was doing and then actually wait for the answer. The look on her face when she realized he was genuinely listening told him more about how much ground he had to recover than anything else could have. He reinstated the Friday lunches. He started greeting employees by name again. All of them, not just the managers. He walked the floor not to scan for problems, but to talk to people, to ask questions, to learn things about his own business he had apparently stopped knowing. He created a scholarship program for students in the neighborhood, quietly funded, low profile, administered by a small committee that included Marcus and Dorothy from the flower stall and 2 teachers from the local school. He called the Hargreaves account manager back, not to pitch, not to recover the contract, but to apologize, to say that he understood why they had left and that they had been right to do so, and that he was working on it. The account manager was silent for so long that Ethan thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "I'll pass that along to the CEO." The contract came back, partially, 8 months later. Slowly, the store changed again. Not its layout or its products, something less visible than that. The atmosphere. The way employees held themselves when they walked the floor. The quality of attention customers received when they had a question. Small things. It appears in the moments when we are standing in front of someone who cannot do a single thing for us. A janitor in a worn jacket. An elderly stranger with a cleaning cart. Someone who asks a simple question in a voice that expects nothing from us. What we do in that moment, that is the answer. Not to any single question. To the only one that matters. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us, have you ever misjudged someone based on appearances and later realized your mistake? What would you have done if you were Ethan that day in the store? Do you think Samuel was right to forgive him? And if you made it all the way here, if you stayed through every moment of this story, then you already know something important about yourself. Hit the like button if this story hit different. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Because if you love this story, we promise, the next one will find you exactly when you need it. We'll see you there.